Okay, the time is 7:05, and this is the March 2024 meeting of the Urbana Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. Marcus, could you call the roll, or you don't have that information?
I can call roll.
Oh, you can. Thank you, Dan.
Adams,
Here.
Jones,
Present.
Griscom,
Here.
Huang,
Here.
Ishii,
Here.
Michelson, Portis, Prasad, Sapphire here, Westcott,
Here.
Zeman. All right.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dan. Are there any changes to the agenda that anyone would like to offer? Okay, seeing none, we do not have the minutes of the previous meeting in our packet today, so we can go on to public input and commissioner communications. I don't see any public input, so would anybody like to take up to 5 minutes to communicate some information? Right, any information that's relevant.
Maybe a little early, but May 8th is Safe Routes to School Bike and Roll to School Day. So if anyone has venues for getting the word out or has children, maybe consider biking to school with them then. I know it's a little early, but.
Yeah, remind us again at the announcements. This is just an opportunity, just like the public, to share what you, and also because, as you know, we have an open meetings law that governs communications amongst ourselves. This is the place to say those things that you couldn't really say before, to make sure the public's privy to it. So just remember that we'll have that at every meeting. Okay. Unfinished business. We have the meeting calendar, which was in your packet. Except most of you, I think it wasn't actually attached to that, to what John just gave me. Let me see if there's any in the back. Oh, okay. It is on the back side. So everyone can turn it over and see the back side. I'm sorry. Yeah. All right. Since we didn't have a officially published schedule, that's why this is a special meeting tonight with the appropriate notification. Yeah. So does anyone have any comment on the calendar? And that leads, okay, if that's good, I'd entertain a motion to approve this calendar for this year.
So moved.
I will second that motion.
Moved by Dan, seconded by Susan. Okay.
I would say yes to the calendar.
Yes. Any discussion?
No.
Please turn on your microphones and speak into the mic.
Yes.
Share the light screen.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. We will take a vote then on approving the 2024 calendar of the Urbana Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. Everyone who agrees signify by saying aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Next, we have the election of the acting vice chair. Since I'm acting as the chair at the present time until the mayor appoints a chair for this commission, we need to have a vice chair for those days that I'm not here, which I know I won't be here for the June meeting. So it will be coming up pretty soon that someone would have to act. Could I have any nominations from the floor for someone to be, and that certainly can be yourself, a volunteer or nominations for a acting vice chair. So this would be, well, we don't know how long until the mayor will appoint a chair, so until such time as one is appointed.
I can do it.
Okay, we have a nomination for Dan. Anybody else? Okay. Can I have a motion for Dan as acting vice chair?
I move to make Dan the vice chair, the acting vice chair.
Okay, moved by Nancy. Do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, seconded by Sue. Everyone who agrees with having Dan be the vice chair, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Dan, you'll be the vice chair and you will be chairing the meeting of June 2024.
All right.
Thank you. And then residential speed limits. This is something that's been on the agenda for a while, so I'm just going to give a presentation on the topic, and I've given you all a handout. This is becoming a very intense topic, both locally and nationally. The realization that pedestrian deaths are going up tremendously has come to the consciousness of the American people, let alone how much higher American fatalities are, traffic fatalities in general are compared to other developed nations and even much lesser developed nations. So I'm going to show a few slides from a webinar that's available online from the League of American Bicyclists. And they have a big initiative, as actually does practically every other advocacy group for pedestrians, for public health, for cyclists, motorcyclists. Slow roads has really come to the forefront of attention. So it is available online, and I'm sure there is much more information there than I'm going to give today. Okay, it's about totally reframing how we think about road design traditionally, at least since the automakers became ascendant. It's been completely based around cars where pedestrians are intruders into the road, as you're all pretty well aware, I'm sure, because everyone's a pedestrian at some point. We're looking now toward, then the push over the last few decades was realizing that, hey, there's other people there too, and we need to do something about the slaughter on the roads. And so there was an idea about safety, and we have to make accommodations, and we need to have, something for pedestrians, some crosswalks or something. But now we're moving it to where it's realized that let's design the road for everyone, starting with the most vulnerable road users. And then see where cars fit into that. So it's a complete flipping of the script, so to speak. And as I mentioned, lots of advocacy groups are coming together, but most importantly is the U.S. Department of Transportation, which has really bought into this in a way I never imagined would be happening in in my lifetime where they are pushing for realization that speed is what kills people and what ruins our culture, frankly, what is making violence acceptable. Violence and a sort of attitude of, you know, as long as I'm secure in my tank, it doesn't matter what happens outside. And part of that did come out of the need for safety. I mean, we realized way too car deaths, as bad as they are and as much as they've been rising in the recent decades, they are nowhere what they were in the 60s and 70s when cars were not safer. So for the last many decades, cars were made much safer. And to the point where now the emphasis is, you know, I'm safe in my tank and other people get out of the way. But that is changing, and it's being led by our own Department of Transportation and then spread to the Federal Highways Administration. So legislatively, states have the choice of what kind of speed limits are set in a state. So these are residential speed limits where they're focusing, they call it urban district because actually it's not just residential, it's also those districts where people are found on the street in large numbers, like shopping districts, for example, our main street. And this graph is showing the chance of death, whereas, so if you're at 20 miles per hour, your chance of death is actually only about 10%, and I see the axis is kind of missing there. It's about 10% at, well, you guys all have the thing I gave you. 8% it says. 8% chance of death. There's still also about a 14% chance of serious injury too. But it's, because serious injury is so hard to have as a binary yes-no thing, they typically concentrate on death, but let's remember that serious injury is completely life-changing also, most often like a traumatic brain injury. So there are 4 states that have taken it so seriously that their urban district, which includes residential, their limit is 20 miles an hour. There are 19 states that have it at 25, and this is the astonishing thing is a lot of these are like Western states, where you're doing 70, 80 on the highway, and suddenly you get into town and it drops to 25, which is kind of a weird feeling, but also gives you a chance to look around and see what's there. So it's a quality of life thing too. 14 states, and Illinois is among them, have the limit of 30 miles per hour. And then 5 states have 35, but a lot of them, I think, are rapidly changing. 8 states have no speed limit, in other words, letting cities and towns set their own. The push for the League of American Bicyclists, also for NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, and several other groups, is to start thinking about a target speed instead of a design speed. Instead of saying, you know, what's the maximum people can get away with here, we're going to decide that we want people to drive at 20, but we want it to be self-enforcing. We want them to feel like driving at 20. And so one of the big things is to narrow that street. And if you look at the handout I gave you, you can see how if you're going very fast, your field of vision becomes narrow. So that gives the driver the impression that they're going fast enough. Their field of vision has been narrowed there, as well as making it so much safer for pedestrians to cross the street. And just a much more livable culture where everyone can wave to people, can hear the birds. You know, it's a push that many cities are realizing its time has come. And I'll get into that a little bit more. And the other part of this webinar, I skipped over one that was actually quite excellent, which if you want to, I'll send the link out after the meeting, but it was by the AAA Association, which is the American Automobile Association. So it was quite amazing. I guess their funding model doesn't count on cars like I would have expected, because they were adamant that speed Or maybe it does, because they were adamant speed is the problem more than the vehicles. maybe they didn't want to badmouth the vehicles. But bringing down speed is definitely their emphasis too. And the person who spoke actually has conducted very serious studies showing this much of the data on the chance of the probability of death with speed was done by that guy who speaks in that webinar. So the increase in fatality, one of the things he pointed out is the exponential growth of risk with speed. And of course, we know that force increases by the square of the velocity, so it's exponential growth, not just a linear increase. So the fatality rates per 5 mile per hour increase in the limit by road type. It's interesting that, so say from 25 to 30, you might have an increase of 3%. Yes, Sue?
What does the percents mean? Are they if you get hit by a car?
Increase in fatality rate. No, it's just the rate. Oh,
On the street, then?
oh, right. You mean it because, yes, it's because of the force, right.
No, what I mean is the number of fatalities, it's like just based on the road. So it's not like, you don't have the double impact of not only are you less likely to get hit if you're getting slower, but if you do get hit, you're more likely to survive, but that's sort of taken into account.
I think that's included. Yeah. Good point. And then the question always comes up, okay, sure, we can put up a sign, but that's not going to do anything. And that question has been studied. And one thing in this particular study in Boston, where they actually had set up a control situation. So they were looking to see if changing the speed limit would change driver adherence without any special efforts at enforcement. Nothing changed. And they found, really interestingly, reducing the speed limit from 30 to 25 kept the mean speed at about the same, actually. It did not change. But the odds that you would have these drivers falling out of line significantly changed. The odds of exceeding 25 miles per hour wasn't really changed, but the odds of exceeding 30 was changed by almost 10%, and the odds of exceeding 35 by 30%. So those random drivers were falling into line. And just creating a much safer environment all in all, because that also means there was much more uniform speed, which traffic engineers is always their goal, to see a uniform speed instead of weaving in and out. Also, in Seattle recently changed as well, and they went to 25 and 20, and they saw that crashes involving K stands for fatality. A is a life-changing, disabling injury, and B is just a serious injury. The odds for those injuries, the Boston story was on crashes, and this is actually involving injuries. On speed limit adherence, and this is on the injuries. So there were other studies as well. In Toronto, they found going from 25 to 20 decreased collisions by 28% and 67% reduction in fatalities and serious injuries. Another study in Seattle, or it may be the same one. They did no new enforcement or marketing here, so it's really just the speed. And that's the really interesting thing, is that just changing the posted speed limit without enforcement is effective, which was always thought not to be the case. There's tools available to help engineers who have been taught to use the 85th percentile, in other words, to go out and collect data, what are people actually doing, and we're going to set the speed limit by that. There's tools that say, and this is actually designed by the Fed Highways, with the private sector, but it's been used on 3,000 projects. And this is it does use that data because people love data, and it does say what speed people are doing does say something about the road design as it currently is, but it brings into context too, to set a defensible speed limit. So that's one of the tools that's available. We've also seen that those methods, like the 85th percentile, are not really relevant today because those were set, in the first place, they were set for completely different situations where they were concerned with everybody staying uniform, not weaving in and out at all. They were on 2-lane highways, rural roads. Now, and cars, of course, were a different scale completely. Now we have the rising curb weight, and the length and the size has gone up for pickups, SUVs, and cars. Cars are actually down a little bit in length. And then the average horsepower. Okay. So, not surprisingly, pedestrian fatalities involving SUVs and now pickups too, with a huge front that causes a person to be pushed under the vehicle instead of on top of the windshield. The fatalities are up. Although the AAA guy insisted, that I mentioned earlier, insisted it was actually speed much more than the vehicles. The speed of the car, he also said it was not distraction. From their studies, it wasn't so much cell phones. It was interesting. I'll send you the link later. So why does all this matter? Okay, as you've already all heard, that we're reaching recent records in the last 40 years anyway of number of people dying and a big increase in pedestrian deaths who aren't even in the vehicle. Also rarely mentioned is the inequities of these statistics. Here you see for the whole population, the danger of being a pedestrian victim as opposed to a car victim increases according to race, with Asians having the lowest, whites, non-Hispanic, Hispanic, Black or African American, and American Indian having a much greater chance. Actually, the American Indian, 111%. More likely to be killed by drivers while walking than the overall average. And then to bring it local, we don't have those kind of statistics at the moment broken down by race. We only have by gender and age groups locally, although we'll talk later about the RPC is getting more data in, more grants for that work. In the county overall, we've had little realized is that we've had a big increase in bicycle deaths and pedestrian deaths. The absolute numbers are still smaller than they're smaller than average nationwide, I believe. But it's a consistent increase. It's not like caused by a spike in 1 year or something like that. It's been very consistent, definitely reflecting a change in driver behavior from the previous decade to the most recent decade. And although this data set ends in 2018, this has continued. And the percent of the traffic deaths that are pedestrians or cyclists, in other words, vulnerable road users instead of cars, has gone from 15% to 27%. So it's the people outside of the vehicles that are getting really hammered. And it's about 20% nationwide, too. Now, if we get even more local and look at Champaign and Urbana, and this is, again, approximately those same 10 years. The 10 years earlier are in blue. The most recent 10 years, which this is up to 2017, are in red. The pedestrian death rate in Urbana is higher, used to be lower than Champaign's. For a while there, Champaign, for the previous 10 years, Champaign was a little higher, Urbana was lower. But in the most recent 10 years, Champaign has been quite a bit lower. That's the rate per 100,000. And Urbana's been higher. These numbers are the absolute numbers. So you see for the previous 10 years, we had 3 pedestrian deaths, so about 0.3 a year. So it was unusual, it was extremely upsetting, and people looked at what to do about it. Now it's become commonplace. It's once a year. We can just pretty much count on it. Sometimes there's 0 and then there's 2, but it's basically 1 a year. And it's been a significant change. Something has changed. And one thing that happens with that 85th percentile is the speed at which people are driving keeps ratcheting up, and that's been shown in studies. When you set the speeds according to what people are driving and then repost the street at a higher level, they then proceed to drive a little higher. Just human nature, but for some reason that had to be studied and proven. And then when we look at how we stand nationwide, for Urbana, with our 40,000 people, a single death represents a rate of 2.5. This is pedestrian death rates. New York, of course, with a very, very huge population, has a death rate of 1 per 100,000. Chicago, 2 per 100,000, so somewhat less than Urbana, but it's getting up there. Boston is extremely low, with 0.6, and they've been very serious about Vision Zero for a number of years, including that 25-mile-an-hour study I showed you earlier. Seattle, a little bit lower. Denver's up there with us, and Champaign is lower. If we were a state, we'd kind of be between Texas and Tennessee if we were a state rate. The Illinois state rate is 1.4, and it's currently still around that. It's not the greatest, it's certainly not the worst at number 20 out of 50 or something. Okay, and another thing that just is hot off the press is the public safety review. The report was just released to the public, I believe, last week. And one of the things I found in it is that responding to motor vehicle crashes in Urbana accounts for 3 full-time equivalent police officers. And they, unfortunately, this is the time histogram of their calls to respond to traffic crashes, and they mostly occur when they're busy with other things, and it's usually around that commuting hour after work when people are just in a hurry to get home. So it's significant that motor vehicle crashes almost always require a multiple unit response, which exacerbates patrol availability. Elsewhere in the report is very, very concerning about how essentially understaffed the police department is. So anything that could happen to help reduce that. It also mentioned they're completely unable to take on proactive activities that they should be doing regarding traffic that would be more typical. They're basically just running, putting out fires. Okay, so we are aspiring anyway to be a Vision Zero city. We have several of the requirements accomplished, in particular a commitment to achieve 0 deaths and serious injuries by 2030. We aren't so far making great progress on that. Of course, we didn't anticipate a pandemic when that was, we didn't when it was passed. Actually, I can't remember now exactly when it was. Maybe it was October 20th. We might have been in a pandemic. So the main thing I'm pointing to here is that all of these things are incredibly important, and we are doing some of these things. So managing speed to safe levels is what we're talking about today, and we haven't so far made any progress on that. This is also just pointing out the National Association of City Transportation Officials is looking for target speeds rather than design speeds based on the maximum a motorist can drive essentially safely for himself. So where we are in Urbana, historically, we've had some speed reductions. They're listed online in something called Schedule Q in the traffic ordinances, and the reductions are 2002 was the first one, so it's surprising there weren't some earlier, but 25 miles per hour for the University District. But even there, they were, well, let's just wait and see how Greene and Springfield work out first, and then we'll see. So they did it for all but Greene and Springfield, and as you know, it wasn't finished until 2016, some 14 years later, when Springfield and Greene were then reduced to 25 miles an hour as part of the MCOR project. They did do a couple blocks in by an assisted living facility that's basically outside. It's way off to the east, and a new housing development that's right by Crystal Lake Park on Kerr Avenue. There, they do have a couple, and there's even a roundabout there. You've probably seen it by Crystal Lake Park. That's 25 miles an hour, and then Lincoln Avenue, which some people here were involved with advocating reducing that speed limit to 25 miles an hour in response to citizen concerns. And I think Annie saw how difficult that was to even, for them to get through even with approval on all sides.
Yeah, it was humorous. It took Bill Brown just saying, like, it will take you approximately 2 extra seconds to drive this space if we go 25 miles an hour. It was just, it was nonsense.
So the Vision Zero resolution, which was passed, this is the urban Champaign-Urbana Urbanized Area Transportation Study. So it's called CUWATS here. It's Champaign-Urbana obviously are involved, but also the whole urbanized area that's been defined by the Census Bureau and does not include Muhammad or St. Joe, but it does include Tolono and not Rantoul either. But anyway, those other entities are involved. Savoy is also involved. And they agreed to pass a Vision Zero resolution in September 2022. And here I just have a couple points relevant to what it's a couple page resolution. Whereas urban roadways that improve safety also enrich the lives of all community members, and safety countermeasures will contribute to overall population health. And that's just the most wonderful statement, I have to say. I mean, it's putting it under the public health umbrella as well as the vibrant culture umbrella as well. You know, it's not just safety. It's not just barely making it. And then towards the bottom, it also says, CUWAT's technical and policy committees acknowledge and accept that these safety plans, which they also adopted, an urban and a rural one, may result in changes to each participating agency or municipality's approach to the planning and design of streets and legal and legislative frameworks, including the potential to advocate for reduced speed limits. So that's going to be on a little bit more of a global basis than the slide I just showed you, which is, here, we'll do a couple blocks here and there. At least the potential is there. And in fact, there are efforts being made at the state level, which would then become law if it became the default. A bill was passed, I think it passed committee, but wasn't taken up on the floor for a 20 mile per hour residential limit or residential and urban limit last year. So if Urbana is serious about being a Vision Zero community, and it did sign on also onto the regional Vision Zero plan, then these are things we have to be thinking about at all times. So how hard is it to reduce speed limits? Well, and I did write it down here, I think. So I have here from the News Gazette, which some of you might remember, Savoy went from considering reducing their residential speed limit in September to reducing it by December. So it wasn't terribly hard. This was covered in the News Gazette, and drivers, if you see at the bottom here, drivers were going 30. So by the 85th percentile, they were posted appropriately. Drivers were going at the speed that's posted. So that's great, except it's not great because there's more and more pedestrians and bicyclists out there. And also there were those people who were using 30 as an excuse to go 40. And we saw that interesting effect where those people seem to fall into line. While the average speed may not change, it seems to cause a lot of people to fall in line. And I don't think he necessarily noticed that. But essentially, he said, we're not going to go with the design speed. We're going with the target speed. And then they did so. They had to sign, according to state law, they bought the sign, they bit the bullet to pay for signs to make the city safe. The mayor at that time said, and here was around that time was this News Gazette article about how many communities are fielding all kinds of complaints. So were we in Champaign-Urbana about speed limits. That's 2022. So, unless you think it was just Savoy, St. Joseph reduced their speed limit in 2018. Tolono just did it in 2023. Mahomet 2016, and it's not just Rantoul did not reduce their speed limit, but they did decide to allow neighborhood vehicles, which are golf carts, essentially golf carts that have to pass a certain number of requirements. And those can only go at 25 miles an hour. But by state law, they are allowed to be on streets of 30. So that's going to have a slowing effect right there. Rantoul didn't reduce this. Maybe they couldn't afford the signs. They didn't reduce the speed limit, but they did say, okay, you can go out there with your golf carts. And as we saw, it's also nationwide. Even Knoxville, where my son lives, reduced their speed limits to 25 miles an hour in 2022. So it's a real thing. And then let's see. At this point, let me see, what's on the agenda? I don't know if I brought it. Oh, okay. So we'll just go right into new business now. Okay, that's it for that old business.
I think there's reports of city officials.
Right.
Can I comment on your presentation?
Yes, please.
Okay. The one thing regarding the Lincoln Avenue, when speed limits were dropped to 25, citizens were very happy about it. There were some people who were not happy about it, who showed up to complain, but in general, once it passed, people who lived in that neighborhood were very happy that that action had been taken. I was in Minneapolis recently, and Minneapolis has put up, forget what that material is. It's like a thin plastic material, you'd put a sign on. Oh, like a sign in your front lawn, that type of plastic. Why? Corrugated? What's it called? Anyone? I guess so. Yeah, okay. Let's go with that. They put up corrugated plastic signs saying 20 mile per hour speed limit is coming, and it did the same thing like you saw with the Boston one, where they had a saves lives at the top, 20 mile per hour is coming. So it was a way to let people know speed limits are going to be dropping. And so my suggestion, and I was quite surprised by that, the 20 mile per hour, but my suggestion would be, if we were to pursue a drop in the speed limit, and I do know it is up in the Illinois legislature right now, I believe they're trying to get it so they can legally drop speed limits, if I am correct, to 20 to 25, or is it to allow communities to drop speed limits?
Yes, to allow communities without any, without the requirements, which right now is basically signage everywhere.
Yeah, so hopefully that will pass. And I would, and what I would like to say about the 20 mile per hour is it's a do it once and we're done. We're not going to have to drop it down to 25 years from now when we realize that's actually the appropriate speed limit. I'd also like to say 20 miles per hour will save a lot of money for the city, and it will save a lot of money in police. It will save a lot of money in insurance, not only like city vehicle insurance, the people that live here's insurance, and the streets will also last a lot longer. The slower vehicles move over a street, the longer your infrastructure is going to last. So it's going to be, it would save the city a lot of money. It's a weird kind of money thing because people aren't going to see it, but it will. So that would be my other suggestion. And then regarding golf carts, I always kind of found those to be mysterious that people were using them. And my parents are in their 90s, and my mom still is asking my dad to drive their vehicle, and it's not safe. And recently we had a discussion with them about buying motorized vehicles. But when I said, what about a golf cart, Dad? And my dad was like, yeah, I would drive a golf cart, you know, to the hardware store and drop Mom off at the Y and then go to church. And so I really can see how in aging communities, golf carts and having a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit would really make a much more livable community for people. So that was the first time I kind of understood what was behind all that. So, and my mom is having vision issues, so she should not be driving that golf cart even. And we're also very worried because we got our walkers, but we're worried about her crossing the street. But if she had a golf cart, that would be a game changer for their mobility. So I just want to say thank you for this presentation. I think it's really helpful. I'm very excited to see on the federal level the direction things are going, and I'm very excited to see, I think the state of Illinois is going to be moving in that direction, and I really think it'll be a game changer for people moving around cities. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll just mention that Urbana does have an ordinance to allow the golf cart neighborhood vehicles on campus because the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit there. And so, and they actually had a law, and I don't remember, I don't know when it was in the midst of time where they had banned golf carts from neighborhood vehicles from the city streets.
What's interesting is my mom brought it up. Like she said, oh yeah, the nearby XYZ city is going to be allowing golf carts.
Yeah.
And
And that's actually at least part of the motivation behind some of these towns that I mentioned, is they want to be able to get around and have their kids get around with these neighborhood vehicles, as they're called now. Because they have to meet more requirements than just a golf course golf cart. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I had a question too. So, yeah, just to clarify, like what kind of changes are we proposing to the speed limit, like for certain areas, and maybe down to 20 miles per hour? And I saw you mention the cost that was for Savoy. So I'm curious if we have an idea of how much it would cost for Urbana.
Very good. Yeah. We'll talk about that when we talk about
Okay,
a potential action item. Yeah. Did you have a staff report, Marcus?
No, but I've got a question. I've been poking into this over the last couple of years and asking, like Tim Cowan. I thought that there were some provisions.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Hey, okay.
Yeah, but I can speak louder. I thought there were some provisions where if an ordinance was passed changing the base speed limit of the city, then you wouldn't need to sign every street because the base speed limit of the city is being changed, as opposed to having a base speed limit of, say, 30, but having a bunch of different little districts that were different. Then you need to sign those areas that are different than the base speed limit. So did Savoy change their base speed limit, or did they change sections of it from, and that might depend on whether the city has petitioned the state to allow it to change it from the state's default urban speed limit. So this isn't my thing,
My
but-
understanding is that they did change the base speed limit in the ordinance. It's now states that everywhere is except, and then they have the schedule of the streets that have higher speed limits. And there are arterials and so on that they said they would require a approval from the state to change, so they left them as is. But they did have to put up a lot of signs.
So they're
And so I
having
think
to
that's the
signage
law.
the
They had to
higher
put up
speed
signs.
limits.
No, they
streets.
signed the 25 mile an hour in about, he said 30 to 60 signs. So in other words, every entrance to the neighborhoods.
Even though
every
they passed
entrance.
an ordinance saying the base speed limit is now.
Yeah, but in order to not have to name every every street that has a 25 mile an hour limit, they did say all the streets in Savoy are at 25. Now, with the exceptions of this, actually their ordinance lists every single street that has an exception,
So are they signing the slow streets or the fast streets?
both.
Yeah,
The
right now.
fast ones
I was
they
gonna
just
say,
left as were.
Right now, Illinois
Those were
law.
signed.
Right now, Illinois law says you have to sign everything. What we're hoping will pass at Illinois legislature is a law that will say you don't have to sign. You can do what Savoy did, which is say we're going to drop speed limits to 20 mile per hour everywhere, except where signed. Right? Essentially, I'm not saying that's what their law was. That's because Savoy can't supposedly legally do that now. There's also the other tricky point that people say is legally they can't give people speed limits and speed tickets because right now you can't legally change the speed limit to 20 miles per hour if I'm correct. Like there's just sort
No,
of
you may change it, but you have to sign it. That's all.
I
You may change it
don't
to
know.
25. 20 is only in certain specific zones, urban zones, park zones. Maybe there's a couple others.
Yeah, so the
20 is allowed.
all I know is
Yeah.
like years ago when we started talking about this, the fantasy was there would be a sign that would say, "Welcome to Urbana. The speed limit's 20 miles per hour."
And actually, you bring up a point I forgot that, we don't have the ability to lower Urbana as a whole to 20 because the 25 is the absolute minimum other than special zones, including, of course, schools. That's like 15, I think. But also park zones, and there was a couple other things that could be 20.
Because, right now as a driver, it's pretty confusing. You're driving down half of Lincoln, you're like looking for a speed sign. You're like, oh, it looks like it's 30 here, now it's 25 here. You drive in another part of Urbana, you can go 35. You drive in another part, you can go 40. Frankly, it's confusing.
Well, one thing that's just interesting is you turn off Lincoln, which is this main collector street, and suddenly you can go faster on the residential streets, even though you have to do 25 for good reason.
And as a person who, commuted on Washington, walked on Washington, Washington's obnoxious. People drive outrageous speeds on that street, and it's, I believe, 30. So I guess people are going 35, 37, and there's no crosswalks. There's nothing to stop or slow down traffic.
I know that we've had many citizen complaints for Washington. And that's one of the things that these small towns mention is citizen complaints drove some of their decisions. Mm-hmm. Whereas we've had complaints, and I'm not sure what the response has been.
Well, there's a radar sign up there now, and people go slower when they can see their speed.
Those signs are very effective, and that's one of the things that Safe Streets for All grants are paying for, is those speed trailers. Yeah.
Actually, I have a question. So, I see that Urbana had more fatalities for pedestrians and bicyclists in the past 10 years than Champaign. Is it possible because Urbana just have more people bicycling and walking?
That's a question about exposure. And I forgot the exact answer. I have to think about that. We do have a higher level of commuting, according to the American Community Survey. We have a higher level of commuting by bike and foot.
Yeah. So
But
I guess,
the change, I guess, is the real point, and the fact that Champaign changed in the opposite direction, whereas we changed to increase the deaths.
I think that also touches the question about where do we want to impose the speed limits. For sure, like for example, I don't want to bike on University Avenue because it's too fast and it's not safe for bicycle. But there might be some like safe streets for bicycling, and maybe we can put a lower speed limit for some reason. For some parts, we don't have to. It's just a thought.
Yeah, I had a related question. So I'm curious too about the volume of cars, so not just the speed. If we have any data on like how many cars are on our streets now as opposed to in the past. And then I guess following up on that, is there any way we could propose that we try to reduce the number of cars or the mode share or like vehicle miles traveled, something like that, in addition to or separate from reducing the speed limit?
Yeah, there is a site, and I'll send that out also along with this webinar link that shows the measured volume of cars for every street in the cities. And as far as whether they've increased, I would imagine there is. I don't have access to that data, whether there's data for that. Now, we know the population hasn't increased.
The thing
That
about
has
the good news about increased cars is it does slow down traffic. Congestion slows traffic, so that's a good thing. I mean, you'll see that if you're trying to cross the street over by the Granger Engineering campus. And I would like to say of the people who were killed, there was a nurse who took care of her parents who was crossing the intersection right up here on Main Street. She was hit by a car that was turning. That could have just easily been solved and can still easily be solved by just putting a no turn on red sign at that intersection. There was a man that was using an assisted mobility device who was coming out of the Schnucks parking lot. He was killed by a truck that hit him. There was a woman that was walking, got off a bus on Main Street over kind of near if I mentioned the Walmart, but it's not quite by the Walmart over there. She was crossing the street. A car just ran her over. So it's not a volume of pedestrians and cyclists. It's our road design, and that is killing people.
Well, also the speed limit may be a factor there. I mean, when cars are coming at you at 35 miles an hour, you're paying more attention to it, and there were left turns involved in the first couple she mentioned. You're paying attention to that car coming at you and barely taking your eyes off it to look at what's right in front of you. Both cases, they miss the pedestrian.
And it all has to do with speed. The only reason we allow right-hand turns on red is because we're worried about slowing somebody down in a car. And if you're a car driver, it's pretty stressful. If you don't want to take a right-hand on red because you know it's unsafe, you have to sit there at your car and be like, okay, I can go, I can't, instead of just like, no, turn on red, wait for the green, then go. So it's all about speed, whether it's posted speed limit or the speed at which we're asking people in vehicles to move their cars.
Yeah, I mean, every kind of turn is going to be safer if cars are going at a slower speed that you can see and understand what's going on. Yes,
I think we do have data on the mode share, and I think we've been going in actually a positive direction, if I remember right.
Yeah, so what made me think of that was during our last meeting, the presentation from, I forget his name, the gentleman from the university. Yes, thank you.
Back, yeah.
On the like web platform that they have, they showed that they were actually tracking vehicle miles traveled for the university, and as a goal, they're trying to reduce it. So I guess I was curious if we could somehow incorporate that as well.
That's a really good point, and that's something that the Regional Planning Commission has in their long-term, long-range transportation plans.
Okay, cool.
Is goals to reduce mode share.
Thank you.
And that is a very welcome comment, because I live near a street that the city recently said they want to increase. They're going to build for an increase of 30% traffic. We were like, where is your 30% increase of vehicular traffic coming from? Number one, and number two, why?
Yeah, we might be getting a little off track, but what also made me think of this was the Florida Avenue study, where there was this idea mentioned that we're kind of building for a future with more cars, and I'm just wondering if we can kind of reorient the perspective towards like let's build a future that we want, and we get to decide whether or not there are more cars.
Okay. Well,
Anyway,
thanks so much. All excellent points. And moving on to just
Audrey,
the
before you
last
move
item on
on-
our agenda there, the safe, but it's very tight.
Hey,
So
Audrey,
I,
before we move on, is there an action for this?
yes, it's at the end because it's
For this
somewhat
item?
tied to the Safe Streets for All. So I have a proposed resolution at the end. So the Safe Streets for All Planning and Demonstration Grant, those of you who were here, which is most of you, but a couple weren't, but I've sent out the resolution that was passed about 1 year ago in May. We started discussing it actually in March or April of last year, the possibility of Urbana applying for this U.S. Department of Transportation grant, which is really, really, really encouraging planning for bikes and PEDs and Vision Zero. It's heavily influenced by Vision Zero. In fact, you can hardly tell the difference from the websites. And they had it's $1 billion a year and over 5 years. So they also had said that 50% of it would be for planning and 50% for implementation. They couldn't even find enough takers for the planning grants. They were giving it to everybody who applied. We did not apply partly due to a misunderstanding that because our regional planning commission was applying for an implementation grant, it was thought that that meant we couldn't apply for a planning grant when, yes, we could, but we realized this all too late. And staff was very short at that time. So this year it's up again. However, it's a little bit more competitive, only 30% for planning, but that's, still 300 million. And 70% for implementation, which are very, very expensive grants. I mean, it's 20 million, to build a road or something, to upgrade a road. They only gave 48 implementation grants this year. So the announcements were made like in December. So should we apply again? That's the question. And John had to leave, and I just checked with him. He said that out of the $945,000 that our planning commission did receive for planning and demonstration, they did not receive the implementation part of the grant. Urbana is getting $200,000 for a demonstration project on Lincoln between Washer and Killarney, which will basically be paint to try a road diet and collect data on how that functions and whether we can make that permanent. It's required that these demonstration grants are not permanent. They have to be something that's either a short-term or quick-build type of thing. So the rest of it then is going for they're going to get things like pedestrian counters, so mode share again. They are going to be doing trying to nail down those kind of numbers, and they're going to be improving their safety plans, the urban and rural safety plans, which are, as I've mentioned several times, do not break down by city, and yet city is where you have to do the work. So we need the data by city. So hopefully they're going to start doing that maybe with some of that funding. So that's, I listened to the webinar today. The Vision Zero actually had a webinar on applying for these planning and demonstration grants specifically. And I'm going to show a couple slides from that. The thing that was really, well, I can get to it when we look at the slides. So this is just my thoughts. This is totally not, I want people to be thinking, here's just what I'm thinking right now that we could apply for. An appendix on that safety plan that would be our Vision Zero plan, so we don't have to repeat everything they've already figured out for our urban safety plan, but can focus in on Urbana as just an appendix. And maybe that some of the things that weren't covered in that regional safety plan include a focus on equity, especially from a public health perspective. There are Urbana-specific traffic systems and infrastructure, and Urbana, like I said, data, which you can't be accountable if you don't have the data, if you don't know how you're trending. And until 2018, I should say, they always had split the data. It's only since 2018 that they didn't have funding to. The cities apparently agreed with not bothering to. I actually remember Craig announcing that it was somehow going to be better to only focus on rural and urban for the county and not city-specific. And yet, without accountability, you don't know, what you need to do or if it's happening. Okay. So then the other thing is you can apply for, they really encourage you to have several elements, and the grant reviewers are picking out the elements they like and just funding what they like. So you really want to package several elements. You want to tie them together, but you want them to stand alone too, so they can pick out what they want. So demonstration projects, and here I don't have a lot of ideas, but to help, this is just an idea I had. We know that pedestrians in Urbana are definitely partly to blame in some cases for a lack of awareness for some of the crashes that we're having. And there's a lack of awareness from the motor vehicle operators. So how do we make them aware? It's been shown that public education, and it doesn't work anyway because we have a college town where it's so transient. Public education campaigns are of limited success, only for some short time, and then the effect goes away. So what could we do that maybe would get the message across, such as public art installations, something that's more lasting, that speaks for itself instead of being, a public service announcement. That's just a thought. You please come up with your own thoughts. So here's some of the things I saw today. They're paying for things like open streets events, play streets, slow streets, piloting, again with temporary installations, car-free spaces, and even safe routes to school stuff. I mean, people just realized they could apply for these things. This is not something that ever crossed our mind, but of course we'd been told we don't get to apply, and so we were misinformed. But other people have been doing this, and this is the kind of things that I never realized you could do. This one person, a very young planner she was a transportation planner, so she's in the Baltimore City Department of Transportation. She has 1/3 of her time devoted to Vision Zero. She personally did the applications. It's a 1-page narrative for the planning grant. It's a 2-page narrative for the demonstration project grant. She received $1 million the first year and $9 million the second. So she's paying artists to do these things, artists and other outreach people, because equity is part of their focus, seeing what they can do. So she's having ciclovias. She's got ciclovias planned, as you can see. Stipends for community groups to host events at the ciclovias, and then measurement too. And of course there is an emphasis on all these things of measuring the effect before and after. That's very important. I never would have thought that you could do this. It was kind of very amazing, and I'll send out the link to that webinar as well. Supplemental planning, several people used it to come up with speed management plans. And these might be more complicated than what we need. In Urbana, I think we could set a citywide limit or zones. I think we can probably do that without having to create an elaborate plan. But some places, for example, Austin, created a plan and then have been thrilled with the acceptance of the community in Texas to lowering the speed limit to 25 miles an hour. Ensuring equity with making sure that we don't increase enforcement on the people who can least afford to be enforced. So this is something that I think Urbana could really excel at, is coming up with some creative ideas for having enforcement that does not fall disproportionately on the people who can least afford it. We've worked on data analysis, and again, we're complaining now about how much the police cost, and that's one of the aspects that we have, but that might be nice to get a grant for to help cover. And so I'm thinking that why are we only putting Public Works on the spot for this? Why shouldn't we have the planning department? Why shouldn't we have, or community development, or economic development, or the police involved in proposing such a thing? By the way, the deadline, last time we also were up against a very short deadline by the time we learned about it. This time the deadline is August 29th. So we have a little time. Okay, so May 2023, for those that didn't read, we pointed out in our resolution recommending this application that we have a Vision Zero resolution. The complaint has constantly been that there's no funding for anything related to it. So since we have that, and since we've not making progress with the continuing rate of a pedestrian death each year, why don't we apply for the funding? And the problem was, again, the complete lack of staff, as well as having been misinformed for a few months before. So so it's time now for us to decide what our actions are going to be. Should we recommend that Urbana would make an application for a state Safe Streets for All grant? And if so, do we have ideas for that, which we could put in the resolution? I think that would be good to have examples. So probably the one we have, I would read through the one we have, because really at its easiest, we could just add, whereas in 2024, RPC received a partial Safe Streets for All grant, and the rest pretty much follow as they were, and whereas we are a Vision Zero city. One other interesting aspect is that they offered to look over what you're calling your action plan and tell you if it's adequate for you to be eligible for an implementation grant. And the deadline for that is April 17th to submit your action plan and see. So I would be very interested if RPC is submitting their action plan at all, because they did not get any of the implementation money, and that might have been a reason. But this is the first time that they're actually saying beforehand they'll look at your action plan and let you know. Also, from our point of view, the question would be, does that qualify as our action plan? It's definitely lacking some specifics to Urbana that might make it difficult to pass as our action plan. We could get an answer on that if we put that in. But the other thing is that part of our grant, as I mentioned, would probably be an appendix to bring us up to being able to say we actually have a Vision Zero action plan. And then the draft action too, regarding the speed limits then. So they're related, because the Safe Streets for All grant could fund a lot of these speed studies. They're funding speed trailers. They're even funding signage. I mean, we could apply for these things to make Urbana able to reduce its speed limit. Now, before I would invest a lot of time in this, I want to make sure that it's going to be useful even if we don't get the grant. That it's a plan for us regardless, whether this particular, because I'm a little worried about the competition, because they cut the program from $500 million to $300 million. So should BPAC recommend that Urbana should lower the residential and urban, that would be like the shopping, heavily pedestrian zones throughout the city or in specified districts. One thing, like I mentioned, is you could just start working from Lincoln Avenue to the east. But that has the complexity of confusing people. Now I'm in 25, and now I'm in 30. Maybe the whole city would just be better. So should we also make that recommendation? We need to have a resolution in our packet that comes to us prior to a meeting so that it's publicly posted before we can take action on it. So if the answer to these things is yes, we'll get a resolution drafted before the meeting, and no more than 3 tops can work on such a thing outside of the meeting because of Open Meetings Act. And then it would be included in the packet for consideration at our next meeting. And then if it's passed, it would go immediately to the mayor and city council. I think that's it.
I have a clarification question. So with the funding for these changes in the speed limit, is that at all in any way associated with the grant application?
So that's a good point. They can be related, yeah.
Okay.
They can be. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
It was interesting in this webinar how many things they want the different things to support each other, like so that you'll fund it all, but they also wanted them to stand alone so they would pick out and fund at least some of their grants, which which is what they did. The woman who received 9 million, didn't get 1 million that she asked for. So she was crying sad tears. She only got 9 out of 10.
So what you suggest to them is basically line items, and then they say, we're going to fund these line items, but not these other ones.
Yeah. And it's just a 2-page narrative for the demonstration projects.
Well, Audrey, I'd be more than happy to work on something and put something together, because I think you and I both know that the city does not have the staff to put together a narrative, and I think if we proposed a narrative and the city was supportive of it, and it worked in tandem with what RPC was doing, I think it would be a very strong proposal.
Well, that would be up to the city, since the city itself is the only eligible applicant. We can't apply. Yeah.
No, we can't, but I think we can put together a proposal that the city could work with, instead of asking the city to try to come up with something, because I don't think they have the bandwidth to do that. I would be more than happy to work on a 3-page narrative and put something together, if that would be
Well, and
useful.
I'm really interested in the possibility also of bringing in other departments. This isn't just engineering anymore, We're talking about community development and health and economic development and enforcement. It's much more than just engineering, which that's basically who has been very, very short-staffed.
So,
But if we can fill in.
what does that collaboration look like in practice? Like members of this commission meeting with members of other groups, and can you just explain that a little bit?
I've never done it before.
Okay.
so we're all on even ground right now.
I think engineering is not the only short-staffed department. I believe last year, City of Urbana Planning had 5 planners and is now down to 2. I think one thing we could do is maybe present a few of our ideas for where speed limits could be reduced. And in this presentation, which is very nice and comprehensive, it doesn't show where in the Illinois compiled statutes the city would be allowed to reduce speed limits, or how that would work. So I think getting the actual language together with maybe a few proposals that would be legal to be presented to the Traffic Commission. I think any joint recommendation from BPAC and the Traffic Commission to City Council would carry more weight.
Well, everyone is aware of the statute, and I'll send that out as well. As I mentioned, you can reduce it to 25, provided that basically an engineering judgment is involved in agreeing that there's a reason to.
Here's another thought. I would really like some crosswalks. I'd really like a crosswalk right here in front of the school, so kids could actually cross the street safely to get to school. I'd really like a crosswalk on Washington Avenue so kids can cross the street and walk to school. What if we put together a proposal that asks for demonstration projects on crosswalks and on helping kids walk and bike to their school?
Yeah, as long as it can't be a permanent installation. But so in other words, you need to plan some kind of metric for before and after. Yeah.
That's because that was my question.
My
thinking was the thing you're thinking of putting together, where there would be. What are these specific things, right? Because we talked in the thing. It said we had these fatalities. Okay, what do we do about it? And do we need crosswalks, et cetera? So that's what and that's what I like, the idea of a couple people getting together and getting the stuff and saying, let's ask for a demonstration project. And I think that would be a great way, because basically if we can demonstrate it, then people are going to be happy like they were when they lowered the speed limit on Lincoln. Once it's there. And I know, because we surveyed the folks on Anderson and that whole area, they want the slow street.
What time is it?
817.
817.
I think another source for that narrative, if people put it together, could be the Urbana pedestrian master plan and the bicycle plan. Using some of those strategies as demonstration.
Yeah, our traffic commission consists of one person from engineering, the chief of police or his delegate, and I believe it's council member Chandra Bishop, I believe is the council member on traffic commission, and they don't meet very often. They're typically dealing with car parking. So they haven't seen this, and that's part of the reason I showed you how slow and glacial, really, the changes to 25 miles an hour have ever been throughout the history of the city. The schedule showing increases above the statutory 30-mile-an-hour limit is quite a bit longer schedule where people have wanted to go fast, including East Main, where someone, as Annie mentioned, was killed. That's on that schedule. So there hasn't, without some sort of reframing of what we're looking for, and they aren't present tonight, I don't think we're going to see a lot of help. Although Chandra Bishop is very involved in public health, I believe.
I found the traffic commission very helpful. So I don't think there's a reason why we can't work with them. I have found all the commissions to be very helpful, and there's no reason why we cannot meet. I mean, I will be meeting with each of these commissions regarding the Sage Trail. You just have to set up an appointment and talk and meet with them and share. It's just that they don't know what we're doing, and they can't know what they don't know. So it's kind of up to us to, we're the experts in this, and we're the ones who are most interested in it. And so I don't know quite what path forward you're seeing on this, but the path forward I'm seeing is people get together, 3 people from this commission get together, come up with some proposals, and we try to move it forward. That would be my suggestion. I'm not sure what path forward you would be seeing.
I don't know if this is a point of order or not, but I want to make sure that folks understand the Open Meetings Act talks about no more than a majority of a quorum can meet. So I don't know if that would be no more than 2 from the commission meeting.
Well, the quorum is 6 for this commission.
How many members of the commission are there?
11.
Wow, that's huge. Okay.
Yeah.
That's,
Gives
okay.
us a little more flexibility.
Okay, yeah, 3.
Yeah.
You got it. Okay, thanks. Sorry.
And we have the good fortune to actually be full right now. All vacancies are filled, except for the youth vacancy. But that's not a voting member. Well, we can have, I'm willing to, I actually have already started the resolutions for the speed limit and the Safe Streets for All. So if this group wants to move forward with seeing a resolution that we can discuss and vote on at the next meeting, which we'll have to give them a little bit of background because we are missing 5 members.
One thing I would say is I think the lowering the speed limit task is going to become a lot simpler once the state legislature allows for us not having to sign everything everywhere all the time. I think at that point it'll be very clear that this is the direction the state is going, and it's very clear that this is the direction the city of Urbana should go. So I think we might be fighting an uphill battle until that point. And I do think that we actually might see that Illinois resolution passed.
I agree with you, and so that is something to consider, that maybe we're spending a lot of energy on something that's going to happen anyway. Maybe we could just ask the city to send a letter of support to the state legislature. for any bills that come before it about reducing speed. Now, the one that never got out of, or it did get out of committee, that never made it to the floor, was actually a mandatory speed limit of 20 miles an hour. So that was, I'm sure that they were expecting some compromise. They were probably going to settle for 25, but that was that will be the residential speed limit, not you can do it without signing or anything like that. It was just, this is what it is. So everyone was going to have to change signs, and that's one problem.
Can we vote on this and make it happen?
But, so wait, so we're thinking of asking for money to pursue, I guess I'm still confused as to what, you're going to put together a draft consideration. I guess I'm not quite sure what the what is.
Okay, so we have the Safe Streets for All application. And Annie, you've offered to help with the narrative, and I would help also, but I think it would really be up to the city. I mean, for one thing, there is a match involved, so it's definitely their thing. Now, salary can be used
So I'm
for
sorry,
the match.
you want the city to figure out what they want the grant to be for?
Right. It's not for us, it's for the city. It has to be a city grant.
I understand that, but I don't think the city right now has the capacity to figure out what they need a grant for.
Well, they apply for grants all the time. They have to know how to do a grant. They just didn't have staff last time.
They still don't have staff.
No, they've got quite a bit more staff, at least engineering
I-
does.
Well,
Yeah.
then
I
I don't
still
know
think
if you
we
need
can
my
do
help.
it.
I mean, because it sounds like you're just, I guess my help's not
I
needed.
guess I'm thinking that if you two write the narrative, then present that to the city, then they would have that as a basis for the grant. Right. Is that what you're thinking?
Well, I was actually thinking of a series of ideas that we could have. The ones I showed earlier, that was just my stab at it. But we would. It's only, again, it's for the planning. It's only one page. It's limited to one page. You can't go into a tremendous amount of detail in one page. But
So we can suggest ideas.
yeah,
We
that's
could
what I was
potentially even
thinking.
write something, but it's up to them to produce the final result.
Right. Or they could contract someone. That's another possibility, including the
Contract us?
Regional Planning Commission. No, they can't contract us. You may
No,
not
but
be
we
employed
have
by
the
the city.
knowledge. We have the knowledge and we have the strong desire. So, I really think it would make sense if we put together the
Well,
language.
there's nothing stopping anyone from providing a straw man that people could look at and go from there. Well, I like this, I don't like that, and
So is this something that we could form a subcommittee of three? It seems like in the past we've had subcommittees. Is it 3 or 4 people three people could get together and do this and present it to us and then present it to the city?
Well, our history on subcommittees is pretty amazing, I think, compared to most commissions, because I know we've had a subcommittee that actually worked on web design. We had a subcommittee that surveyed the community for slow streets. And nothing has been able to be implemented because then we come up against lack of funding. So this is a way out of maybe that dead end, where we could have an idea and actually propose the funding source at the same time. But I guess I'm just sorry that we're limited to 3, and that's I don't know how common it is for a commission to have a brainstorming session as their public meeting, but that's kind of what we're doing right now.
Is there any way to break it up into 2 different tasks that can be done by 2 different committees? Maybe not.
A committee could present something to the larger commission and receive input on it to develop a draft.
Yes, yeah, that's what we've traditionally done, I believe.
Audrey, a lot of these ideas, there are decks for, they are completed decks. So there's no reason why we could just present the decks and say, do we want to propose a grant to fund this, to fund that? You know, find an overarching narrative that ties all of them together, which is obviously Vision Zero. And just say really specifically, we would like a grant for this, you know, to do these things.
Well, and not to say that engineering, for example, or community development wouldn't have their own ideas too of what they want. I know John's got some traffic calming ideas he wants to see implemented. So it sounds like
Audrey, it sounds like you have a plan, and it sounds like this is something you know how to proceed with. How can we help? How can we be of assistance?
Well, I think that who would like to, I guess we could just see who would like to be on a committee and meet at 25 o'clock to discuss next steps. By the way, you are allowed to talk to each other, just not about city business. You may have gotten the idea you can't talk to each other at all. It is possible to socialize, but you cannot, if you have more than 3, nothing about anything related to the city.
Audrey, I'd be more than happy to meet and help you flush this out further. If you would be one of the people, or even if you're not one of the people, I would be happy to meet and flush this out further. I've written grants. I know how to do it.
And of course, any friends and hangers-on are welcome to join us because they're not covered by the OMA. They have that freedom. Yeah.
There was one idea I wanted to mention. I just saw that, so downtown Champaign, they're going to be piloting, I think it's Friday and Saturday nights, they're going to close off some section of it to, so cars can't be there. And I've always thought that would be something that would be fun to try out for downtown Urbana. So maybe we'll have enough time to see how well that's received in Champaign first, and then, you know.
We have done that in Urbana, and it was wildly successful.
Why aren't we still doing it?
The city was very uncomfortable with it.
Well, okay. Well, we could try again, I guess.
Was there a liability issue or?
The city asked the volunteers who were doing it for free on their own time, with thousands of people coming to downtown Urbana, bringing in thousands of dollars. They asked those volunteers, one of whom I know personally was myself, to provide millions of dollars in liability insurance, LOL.
Well, if we have it as a part of this grant application, we could have some funding for it. So maybe people would get paid.
Yeah, I mean, definitely from what I saw today, which I will send the link to, they said they'll be posting it. That is a good point. I wonder if they're paying for insurance for these giant events, or if it may just be covered by the city because the city's supporting it. So I don't understand how they could ask for
I can also say, like,
insurance.
from a perspective of a person who's done a lot of grants and grant funding and art funding, a big idea is always fundable. So like a cyclovia, we all talked about doing a Green Street cyclovia on Sunday mornings. Ideas like that are very fundable. But again, this is something that the subcommittee can hash out over some delicious beer and kombucha.
Yeah, let's, time is of the essence.
Okay. Okay, well, at the moment, who else would like to be on the subcommittee? Because I think we have to name it. Annie, you would like to be?
I can join. I'm a
Okay,
little
Tommy?
hesitant, but yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to the next agenda item. Announcements.
So Audrey, I have this funny feeling I screwed something up. I sent out an email that had a link to the first draft of the Urbana Sage Trail, the 2-mile Purple Loop, a historical walking tour of downtown Urbana that highlights 20 structures and sites of cultural interest. With city approval, the trail will eventually have a continuous 4-inch purple line that you can follow only on sidewalks and walking paths, not in the street. I asked BPAC members to review the route and send me any feedback. And one thing I want to tell you about the route that I sent out, It unfortunately is, the only way I could make the map was I had to draw a line. So it's unfortunately not something you can have turn-by-turn instructions with, because I know you're going to all find this shocking, but when you do Google Map instructions, you have to drive like a car. And this is not a drive like a car kind of map. So at some point, that would have to get hashed out for a more accessible way to create the map, and that is down the line, though. Right now, what I'm most interested in is asking BPAC for a resolution of support for a walking trail, and for the city permission to pilot temporary sidewalk markings and signs along the trail route. With this resolution of support, I would also like to present the trail to the Urbana City Council. I also will be, now that I have the trail sorted out, I'll be presenting it to the other commissions and getting support and buy-in and interest from them. And that's all I got.
Sorry, and maybe this should have been in the earlier. Yeah. But my thought on the trail was there is a segment that goes south on Race and then north on Race, overlapping in front of the library. I think there's a way to fix that if you go like on Kohler, but super minor. I would totally support you doing that, and I think you should tie it to the pedestrian master plan that calls out a walking trail for, I forget the exact wording, if it's for like tourists or just pedestrian interaction. And if you have trouble finding, I can look through the plan again too.
Okay, well, a point of order. I think if we're going to take an action on something, we need to put it on the agenda. But it's fine to make an announcement, and there's nothing stopping you from getting it on the next agenda.
So why don't we just get it on the next agenda? We'll give everyone some time to look it over, because it did become a much better route once I shared it with a couple of people, and it is all mid-block crossings. So those of us who know where accidents have been in Urbana, I avoided those areas. And it's pretty, what I like about the walking path that is so far in existence is you can just move without stopping. You can just go, 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 go. You don't have to wait. I mean, you obviously have to, look at crosswalks. But you don't have to wait for beg buttons or push beg buttons or anything. And then something like, I'm just going to be curious, there's a couple parts in there that we might have to change some parts. So I really would like if you could actually walk it and we can get feedback. It might have to be made a 2.5 mile loop, but right now it's exactly, the whole point for me, for some weird reason, was I wanted it to be exactly 2 miles. So that's what we got. So at least on my little walking app, it said 2 miles. So I would just love if people could check it out and then give me feedback about how it operates and what you think about it. And then, next month we can proceed.
Okay. Future topics. We have the Sage Trail. We have the resolutions for Safe Streets for All and the speed limit ordinance.
And I would like to announce that the Gibson Area Hospital is going to be sponsoring, and Habitat for Humanity, a June 1st tour that they're trying to make. Their goal is at least 200 people participating, and it's going to be well-sourced, well-resourced. They got the SAG and all the good stuff. So
When is this?
June 1st. And it would include a century and a metric century and all kinds of other options.
Audrey, can we have clarification on the difference between an announcement, like what Sue just said? That's an announcement.
Yeah.
And what at the beginning? Like, can we have examples of like what you're looking for at the beginning?
It would be like public input. Whatever you ever see
What
the
you just
public
said.
come in and just share with us, you could share. Why should you not be able to share also?
Right. So you could just say like, oh, recently I was crossing this street and I noticed there are a lot of chickens that are occupying the street. I wonder if this is something we should look into, for example.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Or even the whole thing you were just talking about, wanting to do these specific things that you can't talk about with all of us that's not at a meeting, but it's not on the agenda yet.
Yeah, so please make use of that, because it's a shame to come in and restrict, the conversation when there's something heavy on your mind. You just made a huge discovery or something.
I think one announcement, RPC is holding a plan commissioner training, I think, on April 26th at Illinois Terminal. April 1st? April 1st. It's free to attend for the public. I think there's a buffet dinner. You can pay $25 at the door if you'd like to learn how to be a more effective commissioner or board member. That's what the training will focus on.
Wow. How did you hear about this? Who didn't hear that? Yeah. Okay, well, I will also send, in case anyone thinks of anything, I will also send out a call for agenda items during the month. Okay? So with that, it's 8:40. The clock has not been changed yet. I guess this meeting is adjourned.